leader of the PC party, Patrick Brown. And Patrick, as you know, has also been doing delegations and will be hosting a reception tonight. And these are your opportunities to share with him and hear about how Rural speaks. Now it is his time to share with us. Patrick started his political career at a very young age. He was elected councillor to the city of Barrie in 2000 at the age of 22. He served on a number of city committees, including the Budget Committee, so we know he has first-hand knowledge of the challenges of municipal fiscal sustainability. In 2006, Patrick was elected as a Conservative federal member serving the riding of Barrie until he was elected leader of the provincial PCs in 2015. He has a law degree from the University of Windsor. He did work in the private sector for a bit of time before he heard that public service siren call. So please join me in welcoming Patrick Brown, leader of the Ontario PC Party.
Well, thank you, Ron, and that's some pretty impressive introductory music that Ron has as ROMA chair. I should note that I'm joined here today by Ernie Hardman, a former mayor and a former chair of ROMA. He's been leading and coordinating our delegation. So, Ernie Hardman, can you give us a wave? Where's Ernie? There, he's at the back. And certainly Ernie's wealth of experience in municipal politics is a big service to our provincial caucus. Ontario's rural municipalities are some of the most beautiful and diverse parts of our province, and as Ontario PC leader, one of my real pleasures is traveling the province, listening to the concerns, and visiting many of your municipalities, and to really listen. That's one of the beautiful things about ROMA, is it gives us the opportunity to listen, to make sure that we understand the challenges and the opportunities that exist and how we can help. You know, I realize that Ontario's rural municipalities are home to world-class businesses, a highly skilled workforce, and we need to make sure that government removes the challenges that you face, because Ontario cannot continue to fall behind. I think part of the question we have to answer is, why have we seen the slippage? How has Ontario become a province that receives equalization payments? How have we become a province that's lost 350,000 manufacturing jobs? And what tools can we give you to make sure that that cycle doesn't continue and that you can succeed? And the only way to ensure our local communities can thrive and attract investment is to act upon the advice that you've been giving us at this conference and around the province. Because when North Dumfries, New Tech, or Stirling succeed, Ontario succeeds. When our small municipality succeeds, Ontario succeeds. And, you know, I've spoken around this province about my four-pillar plan for economic development, looking at the broader context of Ontario on a whole, and talking about cutting red tape, investing in infrastructure to get product to marketplace, linking education to employment, and affordable electricity prices. And if there's one thing that I noted today during the delegations, that one of those themes got talked about more than the others, and that's affordable electricity. I think it was raised by every one of the delegations we met with today. So let me start by addressing the issue of hydro. I want to start by saying the fire sale of Hydro One was a mistake. It's a bad deal for Ontario, and I applaud the over 200 municipalities that passed resolutions opposing this decision by the provincial government. We will lose $700 million a year because of this fire sale, and something that frankly hasn't got enough attention, and I think is of particular concern for rural Ontario, is that there is no guarantee we're going to continue to see the new owners invest in transmission lines in rural Ontario. And that's something that I think everyone should be alarmed by. I think it's one of the reasons we've seen so many rural municipalities talk about the short-sightedness of the fire sale of Hydro One. The other issue on hydro that I'm particularly concerned about is the unmitigated disaster of the Green Energy Act. Now, I realize that in many cases it's been put into place despite your objections. I know the Premier assured you that we wouldn't see these major renewable contracts put into unwilling host communities. That hasn't happened. We've seen them located in unwilling host municipalities, particularly in rural Ontario. That's not right, especially given the fact, It's one thing if we were using the electricity in Ontario. One thing that is particularly egregious, as you came to me today and talked about having skyrocketing hydro bills, it's particularly egregious to know that since 2009, we have given away $6 billion in surplus electricity. We charge you, despite your objections, we charge you, and then we give it to Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New York. It's unbelievable. We should not be charging you to give it away, and I can tell you that the Auditor General's report, particularly on this, was stinging. The Auditor General's report said that Ontario ratepayers overpaid by $9.2 billion for green energy. And it isn't about green energy. Everyone supports green energy. It's about the overpayment. You know, I was sitting today with the mayor of Kenora, who told me about a green energy, a water project in his area where they spill water. Our own green energy we can't use because we've signed contracts, many cases foreign contracts, for energy we don't need. It's not about green energy, it's about bad contracts. And I can tell you, the Ontario PC Party, what we do differently, because it's one thing to criticize, it's another thing to say what you do differently. We would dismantle the Green Energy Act. We will restore municipal planning rights to put an end to wind turbine contracts in municipalities that do not want them. And we will stop any further sales of Hydro One if the Wind government hasn't sold every possible share left. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that this is really affecting small towns. Just recently, I was back home in Barrie reading the local papers, and from Simcoe Muskoka, and I read about Muskoka Meats owner Dave Purdon. He launched a half-price sale on frozen meat to pay his hydro bill. And that's not happening just in Simcoe Muskoka. I know that's happening across the province, and that can't continue. And let me say, this new cap-and-trade proposal will not make the situation better. The new cap-and-trade proposal is just as short-sighted as the Green Energy Act was. The new cap-and-trade proposal, right now as it's configured, will send $466 million to California and Quebec by 2020. We have to buy green credits from pre-existing green economies in California and Quebec. $466 million outside of Ontario. You know, we all want to fight climate change. I want to fight climate change. But if it's really about climate change, if it's really about the environment, why does government need to get $1.9 billion? If it's really about the environment, we should give the money back. We should give the money back to you. We should give the money back to taxpayers. I don't want to say we're going to take advantage of people's goodwill in the environment simply as a revenue tool for government, because that is inherently dishonest, and that's what this cap and trade is about. Another issue that got brought up often as I toured the province and amongst delegations here is the whole issue of infrastructure. So let me start with the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. The question I've asked the government and the legislature is, why has this fund been slashed by $93 million since 2012? You know, they'll move figures around. It's a bit of a shell game, but the reality is there's $93 million less allocated in that fund. And that funding needs to be restored. You know, let me give you some examples of how this has affected communities. The town of Ingersoll received $880,000 from the OMPF in 2012. Now it's down to $390,000. Owen Sound's transfer payment dropped from $960,000 in 2014 to $770,000 in 2015. The County of Haliburton received $1.9 million in 2010. In 2017, they will only receive $393,000. This fund has been a critical revenue source for Ontario municipalities. It's my belief, it's our party's belief, it's our caucus's belief that funding needs to be restored, because communities need infrastructure investments. If a business is going to be looking at your community, they need to see sound roads, they need to see professional infrastructure. And I really believe, as much as we hear from government a commitment to infrastructure, I believe that's an insincere commitment. Every time there's a by-election, we hear about a new infrastructure project. Look at the twinning of Highway 69 in Sudbury. Look at the expansion of GO in Niagara. But nothing happens. It gets forgotten after the election, and that can't continue. And I'm concerned, if you look at the gas tax announcement that some of you, I know most of you probably won't even receive the funding in the first place, but it's not even going to come in until well after the next election. I'm tired of infrastructure promises that are way into the distant future. How about putting shovels into the ground now? How about help now? Wouldn't that be a change? And let me also add, remember when they had the Hydro One fire sale, they said, this is for infrastructure, because they know we believe in infrastructure. Of the first $4 billion in Hydro One sales, guess how much has been spent on infrastructure so far? Zero. $4 billion so far in sales and $0 spent to infrastructure. That's not the bill of goods which they presented to Ontarians. The sale was supposed to be for infrastructure, and nothing's happened. And that's, in my opinion, is not acceptable because our municipalities are struggling. You know, a 2015 report found that 40% of rural roads and 30% of bridges were found to be in poor or very poor condition. That can't continue. And don't even let me get into the Auditor General's report on infrastructure. If you saw the infrastructure report by the AG just before Christmas, it talked about doing some test projects, looking at a few random infrastructure projects to make sure we're getting value. And the first few projects the AG looked at, we saw cost overruns of 35%. You desperately need infrastructure investments. We're spending $130 billion over 10 years on infrastructure. If we have cost overruns of 35%, can you imagine how much is not getting to municipalities? Look at the projects they looked at. The repaving on the 403, the repaving was happening every 2 years instead of every 15 years. The bridge in Pickering, they built part of the bridge upside down. We don't have performance measurements. We should not be managing your infrastructure dollars in an incompetent manner, and that's what's happening in the province of Ontario, and it cannot continue. And I should also mention on the topic of infrastructure that a number of the delegations today, the Western Wardens Caucus, the Eastern Wardens Caucus, my own warden in Simcoe County has stressed to me many times the issue of broadband access, and I just want to say I understand the gap between rural and urban Ontario is significant on that front, and I realize that broadband access is an important pillar of economic development, and we're certainly committed to look at that in a very serious way, to look at ways the province of Ontario can help. Now, I understand time is limited. I'm trying to get to a number of topics, and one thing that's very important that I did want to address was the whole issue of natural gas expansion. Now, I know the Premier is going to be making an announcement. I think the press release is already out about $100 million for natural gas expansion, but I'm sort of getting tired of the same announcements. Remember 4 years ago, it was $230 million, and then it was re-announced again, and again, and again, and again, 4 re-announcements, and we're not seeing anything. You know, I don't believe this government actually believes in natural gas expansion. And the best proof of that is look at the Globe and Mail article that they had. Remember they got the leaked cabinet document of the government's climate change plan. They wanted to get rid of natural gas in Ontario. The climate change minister, Glenn Murray, has said that natural gas is a problem. Let me say very clearly, let me be unequivocal on this. The Ontario PC Party and our caucus unequivocally supports natural gas expansion as an economic development tool. And we're tired of waiting. Frankly, I've heard too many stories of how this is costing Ontario. Just today, I was reminded by the mayor in Chatham-Kent about the loss of approximately $300 million in greenhouse construction investment due to prohibitive costs to extend natural gas to preferred sites. And their estimate is that costs their region 1,200 jobs. And they're not alone. There's businesses across this province who have said no to Ontario because we've dragged our feet on natural gas. The other thing that I wanted to mention today given the time allocated, is the whole issue. If we fix our fundamentals, if we fix the shortages in infrastructure, if we address the hydro crisis, if we help you with things like broadband, ultimately, if you get a business to your municipality, they're also going to look at the social infrastructure. If we get them to your municipality, they're going to look at the hospitals and the schools. I know in my riding in Simcoe County, small town hospitals are under threat. Rural schools are under threat. And I want to see a real commitment from the province of Ontario that we're not going to hollow out rural Ontario of quality hospitals, of well-supported schools. You know, we are, what I saw at Georgian Bay General, where they wanted to take out of the obstetrics unit, isn't unique. We had to fight that, and we've won for the time being, but it took 15,000 signatures. But I'm hearing similar stories in Wyerton, and Meaford, and Southampton, and Markdale. As I travel the province, I'm hearing stories of a local hospital that's in jeopardy. I'm hearing stories about a rural school that's going to be closed down. And I'm tired of the excuses. They'll say, we're going to close that school because there's not the population. Well, if you take the school out of the city, the population is going to dwindle further. I think it's important to hear from the province of Ontario that you, as rural municipal leaders, can depend on a provincial government that will support schools, not just in big cities, but in small towns too, because that is the story of Ontario, that we want to have quality services in every part of this province, and I can tell you our party and our caucus will be committed to that. Now I realize I'm out of town and I'm trying to follow the time allocated, so let me just close by saying whether it's unaffordable hydro rates, false promises on infrastructure, or cuts to frontline community services, I believe we are making you less competitive right now in Ontario. I want to reconcile that. I understand you need a government that will address the fundamentals for economic growth, recognizing that a competitive rural Ontario, a competitive northern Ontario, helps enable a prosperous Ontario. And I can tell you, our caucus and our team will work day in and day out to make sure that we are partners with you to make sure we can get there. It's an honor to be with you again at ROMA, and you're all welcome to come to our hospitality suite tonight. Have a great conference.
Well, delegates, just join with me. I really wish to express appreciation to Patrick on behalf of my colleagues and on behalf of the delegates here today. We look forward to continuing to discuss concerns and work further with you and your caucus members. And please join me in to thank Patrick being here today. Thank you, Patrick. All the best to you. Look forward to seeing you tonight.